Okay, super. Let's get started. So thank you everyone for being here today and welcome to Spring Quarter. We're super happy to get started today with a wonderful speaker, and I want to thank Dr. Almquist, who's back today to introduce the speaker and his role in inviting her. So we all know Zach, but I'll let you know again that he's an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and a member of the CSDE and greatly appreciated here. So I will just remind you before we start to please put your questions in the Q&A. So that means don't use chat, and you can go ahead and just do that as you think of questions. You can even say that you just have a question, and then I can unmute you and you can ask your questions directly to Dr. Kreuter. So we'll go through that at the end, but I understand that we might have a little bit of a different format, but I'll let Zach and Dr. Kreuter explain that themselves. So with that, again, thanks for being here, and I'll let Dr. Almquist take over and introduce Dr. Kreuter. Thank you.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Frauke Kreuter. She's a professor of statistics and data science at the Ludwig Maximilianus University in Munich, Germany, and co-director of the data science centers at the University of Maryland and Mannheim. She's quite famous over a large set of things, especially in survey methodology. And in addition to her academic work, she's the founder of the International Program for Survey and Data Science, co-founder of the Coleridge Initiative, and co-founder of the German language podcast, Big Deep. I'm really excited to have Dr. Kreuter here, and I will let her take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. This is fun. I know about the center, but I've never visited and never had the chance to speak to this audience. So thank you very much for joining. This talk was advertised, and the teaser was this global COVID-19 symptom survey, which I'm going to introduce in a moment. And I do want to make sure, though, that you know that there's a couple of more recent research projects also that if we have enough time, I'm happy to talk about. Before I get started, I want to make sure to acknowledge a couple of my team members. Large projects like the one that I am about to describe cannot be done without a big team. And certainly on the Facebook side, there are 3 people that deserve a lot of recognition. Esther, Kim, Sarah LaRocca, and Catherine Morris. We also work closely with several folks from Johns Hopkins University, in particular the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and the Delphi group at Carnegie Mellon, in particular with Alex Reinhardt on this. The Delphi group largely organizes, captures the data of the US survey. I will refer to that in a moment. And then the UMD team that's listed above is sort of the team behind the rest of the world data, if you will. So what are we doing here with this survey? And I take it some of you might have seen the data, seen the result. Just several groups actually in your vicinity that are using the data quite heavily. But in case you haven't, way back in March, end of March, or middle of March, maybe sort of that time, several groups approached Facebook and asked if Facebook would be willing to help to create a syndromic surveillance survey. They recognize that it can be very difficult, or it likely will be very difficult to know where the next outbreak is going to be, because by the time people feel the symptoms, then get tested, tests are administered, or results are delivered, it might already spread too fast, right? And we've seen this indeed, and we've seen the delays in reports of official records over weekends. Every graph you look at has these spikes or dips during the weekend. And that is true for the testing data, but also hospital admissions and other data might come with the delay, either disease related or reporting related. So the idea was to ask early, before people even get tested, and capture symptoms that could allow, on a small geographic level, see how the disease might be spreading, but also add information to it that would allow to quickly see how people behave. Do they stay home? You know, how are there social distancing measures instigated? Are people following the rules and the like? And so several groups had approached Facebook to help with that. And they said, well, we can't do a separate service for everybody, but we are willing to take on one instrument that we let run in the US and one that we let run globally. And we sort of organize this collectively, right? And then share out the data publicly with any researcher who is interested in doing so. So this led to this particular structure of data collection, which is, I think, unique and has in this form, to my knowledge, not been done before. The Facebook Data for Good group, and I'll have a slide on that later on, has quite a few data collections going on, but this way of inviting and capturing large-scale survey data, I think that might very well be the first, and since then several others have followed. So how is this working? When people visit Facebook, they will see, or they might see, I should say, because not everyone will, on top of their news feed, the invitation to take the survey. And the unique part here, and the large role Facebook plays in this, is knowing who is sampled and having control over basically the sampling probability, and therefore being able to later on create non-response weights, right? So this is a probability survey just from a somewhat off-base population, right? But there is a population frame and there's a sampling protocol in place, right? So that's how this is very different than other surveys that we've seen, in particular early on in the pandemic. I think there was very quickly a slew of surveys done, basically websites out there that say, come report your symptoms, right? And so I mean, that's great. They generated a lot of data very quickly. And if you look at the relationship or co-occurrence of symptoms, those data collections can be quite useful. But in order to estimate prevalences of certain things, those probably were not the best form of data collection. Now, the catch here for Facebook was so that they knew they don't want to have the data themselves, right? Their health information or other, behavioral information that they don't want to have, because they don't want to get in any privacy conflicts here with the data collected. But even more so, they shouldn't have, because once Facebook is collecting it, they're not allowed to share it out, right? So they needed partners to collect the data. And for this reason, once people agreed to the invitation, they were shifted over to the web survey platforms at Carnegie Mellon University and University of Maryland, and then went through the survey on those platforms. For both universities, the survey results are then shared out in the aggregate to everybody who is interested. Also via an API, so not just the results via graphs and maps, but also via an API for anyone who wants to use on a regular basis the data. And then microdata are shared out to researchers with the data use agreement. Now, having introduced that structure, I want to make sure that you see the difference between this kind of survey and maybe other surveys that you've seen on Facebook, because in the survey research, or I should say in the social sciences, increasingly the Facebook advertisement tool is used to field surveys, right? Where you basically buy advertisement space, which is not very expensive, try to like on your account. This is a snapshot of our account from the joint program in Maryland. And then people participate in that survey. If you do it through the advertisement, the mechanism of recruiting people is very different, right? It's not a random sample, it's algorithmically driven, and it will lead to quite different results. I have a little bit of that with me here too in the slide. If you have enough time, I'll get to that. But for the global COVID symptom survey, the key being this random sample part of the population. So let's look at the instrument for a moment here. The CMU UMD survey instrument, and by now the two surveys are really quite similar to each other, is available in about 50 plus languages. That's the advantage when you partner with a global firm like this. They have a fantastic translation team. And it has 5 sections, a pretty large consent section, in particular to accommodate the European data protection regulation laws, a section on the symptoms that I mentioned earlier, on the social distancing behavior, and then an increasingly larger section on mental health, economic security, and vaccination attitudes, behaviors, perceptions. And then closed out with a set of demographic characteristics. By now, we have about 40 million people responded to the global survey and 17 million responded in the US. So total of what's that, 60 million that handled the survey or responded to the survey. If someone responds to the survey, there's a cool down period of a couple of weeks where they will not be sampled again, but in theory, some of the respondents might be in there twice. As I mentioned before, Facebook is creating the sample daily anew for each country and stratified by region 1, so the equivalent of states in the United States that we sample, except in the United States, we sample on a county level. So they're much smaller aggregates of information possible, and zip code is part of the survey question. We are in the process of adding that to the international part, but that hasn't happened yet. Facebook provides or calculates with the data they have on site inverse probability weights to help adjust for non-response. So they use information of characteristics that they have on the platform, predicting probability to take part in the survey, and then provide us with a weight that reflects that, so that we capture or that we upweight those people that are similar to those that did not participate, and downweight those that are maybe participating too often relative to their proportion in the population. And then this weight is also run through a post-stratification using for the US, the American Community Survey information, and globally UN population division data on mostly gender and age distributions. The survey has a lot of users by now. We have a whole slew of individual users that I'm not going to mention, but there are over 60 institutions that are working with the non-aggregated data. The IHME has sort of daily updating dashboards taking in the data, and the Social Data Science Center at Maryland that was mentioned earlier has also several reports on those data. We can talk in the Q&A about the bias that might be in these data. I have, despite its big user base, no illusion that everyone is on Facebook. However, we think the strengths of this survey and this data collection is that since last April, we basically have data, or whenever a certain question was fielded, right? I think financial anxiety might have started a little later, but we have daily data for each country of a population or of a sample that is drawn from the same population, right? So a very good cross-sectional panel information, which allows us to look at these trends over time quite easily and with a consistent set of data. I think just yesterday, a couple of days ago, the IHME also put out information on vaccination reasons, side effects, or the reasons not to take vaccination, and the goal. And I think this is a very good example for something that was early on intended with the survey, is to inform policymakers using the data from the survey. And in this case, what might be strategies in the vaccination campaigns that need to be taken. The data is available, as I mentioned, via the APIs in the aggregate, or through non-disclosure agreements in its disaggregated form. If you look at the machinery, once you have access, it's, these are FTP servers where academics and nonprofit researchers with the DOA can access and download the data. As I mentioned, there are over 50 institutions that work with the data, including the WHO, KFF, Federal Reserve, and many, many universities. Both Carnegie Mellon and UMD have created dashboards so that you can play around with the data even without any of the data use agreement, not just in a univariate, but also increasingly more variables in combination. This one here is a screenshot from Maryland, and attendance on large events for India and Brazil. I just picked two countries here in which there's a little bit going on over time. Certain characteristics fluctuated a lot, others were remarkably stable, but this is, if you have appetite to get a first sense of the data, that might be a good one. I mentioned earlier that there is a variety of surveys now there are a variety of surveys now that Facebook Data for Good group launches. The Future of Business survey, a collaboration with the World Bank and OECD, has been around for a while. More recently, certainly the COVID-19 Preventive Health Survey that is done in partnership with MIT and Johns Hopkins. And it looks, by its design, very much like the survey that I just presented, but their focus is more on attitudinal questions, less so on behavior. And because of that, they can operate with a much smaller sample size, right? I mean, we are in the US trying to hit 1 million responses a week, and globally, not quite that many per country, but for the attitudinal part, that fine-grained geographic information is not as needed. There are other data types too for all the data scientists or aspiring data scientists in the room. There are population density maps and mobility data and what have you, but I'm no expert on these, so I can't talk about them in more detail. I do again talk though about challenges with the data we collected, and maybe some keyword thoughts for any of you here planning to do projects of that type. If you think of the pipeline that's done here, we have the random sample recruited by Facebook, the use of Qualtrics to take the survey, and then pulling the data from there, matching them up with the Facebook weights via the exchange of tokens, and then creating daily aggregates and sharing those out via an API, and this for millions and millions of records every day, is quite a big of a programming task. And we noticed pretty quickly that at least the students that we've trained in the past, we changed our curriculum, not because of the survey, but shortly before the survey, includes many more of those data science skills, programming, using SQL, large databases, parallel computing to handle such pipelines. And I think if you sort of think of what is a good data science curriculum or a skill set one should have, and I think the social scientists are, and I mean that in the broadest possible way, are pretty good with the data analysis and excellent with the understanding the data generating process. They're also excellent with having the good research questions, but what we lack sort of a little bit is this whole like automatization of data creation and storage. And I do think that that's certainly an area where we all can beef up a bit our knowledge. We had some other challenges too, though. This all happened so quickly that despite our survey methodology expertise, we could not do as much due diligence in pre-testing the questions. So very early on, we had instances where, after these translations and everything went into the field, people would email me and say, it's like, well, this question might not be perfect, and da. Worse, though, was that we didn't do a proper UX test, and there was a hot link to my email address in the general invitation. And so instead of hitting the next button, people would hit my email and would be led to, usually on the mobile phone, right, led to their email program, and then write in an open-ended way all their symptoms, all their experience with COVID or not. They never saw the Qualtrics web survey. And so I had, within a week, thousands of emails worldwide come in. And at first we didn't understand what was going on until we realized it was because of that hot link in the email. We also didn't anticipate that a large survey platform like Qualtrics is not made for having 50 plus translations from a survey at once, right? Where people, can toggle between languages and then change this. It had, it was very difficult to do that, and, difficult to have the language, the different countries or regions within the countries show up alphabetically in the right order, depending on the language picked and things like that. So little minutiae that we didn't think about beforehand, and in a normal survey are not so bad, but when you do this at scale, and I think Zach can tell tales of those kind of things, then little errors like these amplify very quickly. So let me pause here for a moment. I want to make sure that you have a chance to digest all these information, and see if there are any questions to that part of the study that I presented so far. I saw someone posted in the chat, not in the Q&A, but in the chat. So I'm not sure who has the authority to unmute microphones, but Louisa, I see I had a question here.
Okay, so let me unmute her. Maybe you want to read it while I find her name to unmute.
Yes, I can read it. So Louisa, thanks for the question. I'm going to read it out to everybody, maybe someone in here just with audio. Are weights adjusted for the Facebook user population or the general population? So they are a little bit of both. If you remember, I was talking about these two different weights, the non-response weight and the where were we with the weights? The non-response weight and the post-stratification weight. So the non-response weight is adjusting to the Facebook users that were sampled. So, given you were sampled, what's your probability to participate? And then inverse probability weights to sort of have that sample reflected, which you could argue should be also a reflection of the Facebook population at that point, right? Because the sample should be a random sample of that population, or it is. In fact, I know that it is. In order to get from the Facebook population to the general population, that's the job of the post-stratification weights, which is much harder to do because we do get those weights from Facebook, and they have, they might have not the right demographic information about the respondents. I think roughly they're probably right, but again, we're also using only very limited demographic variables for the post-stratification to begin with. When you work with the individual microdata, there's more information there. So, any user of the microdata could go in and use additional variables from the survey to fine-tune the population adjustment if needed. Great question, though. Thank you.
Louisa, if you wanted to follow up, you should be able to unmute.
That was a great response. Thank you.
And I think we have a question from David in the Q&A. David, if you're already unmuted, maybe you want to read this out loud yourself. Otherwise, I can read it.
Okay. Thank you for presenting. We are enjoying your presentation immensely. So these, I had two interrelated questions about the weighting. First, you indicated you're randomly sampling or some sort of random sampling of Facebook users, but are the weights influenced by how frequently a person uses or signs into Facebook? And are people who visit Facebook more frequently have a higher chance of being chosen? Or is it, does utilization of Facebook play into this?
Yeah. No, those are great questions. And, some of their nuances, I'm like, oh, I wish I have thought of that. And then I would have asked the Facebook folks. So I can only answer this partially. The biggest reason why I can only answer this partially is that Facebook is not allowed, like legally not allowed, to share with us the exact information on all the variables that they use for the non-response adjustment, right? And that is because if we really would know all the variables that go in and what response categories there are and all those things, good statistician or data scientist could reconstruct from the weights the original data, right? If you have enough data, you can do that, right? And so, I mean, and so that's why we can't know this. I mean, that's a privacy measure that we don't have full insight into the exact nature of the variables that go in. This said, I don't, to my knowledge, the frequency of being on the platform is not a selection criteria. So the selection itself is a random sample, but it is drawn, and it's drawn daily anew from the monthly active user. So if you are an inactive user and just have an account, then you might be not in the set of even be sampled. But that's the part where I have to follow up on that. Now, if you're a month, if you once a month go in there and are sampled, it is the case that so you would have automatically a higher probability to participate in the survey if you could only see the invitation that day you are invited, right? Then obviously someone who is there every day or several times a day would have a higher chance. But the invitation is programmed so that if you log in rarely, it stays up there for you, right? And so that's their way of ensuring that the less frequent users also see the invitation to the survey. And I'll share with Zach, well, maybe I did already, but if not, I will share afterwards. Facebook has created a separate document that you can find on ArchiveX that describes the sampling and weighting methodology in even more detail, but roughly that's sort of the idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we have a question from Louisa Johnson.
Yes, so you mentioned that you had to change some of the both UX and survey questions after it was deployed. I'm just wondering how straightforward was that given how big it was, how many translations were needed and whatnot?
Yeah, so when Curtis Kopp, who really was sort of the brain behind all of this, he's leading at Facebook the demography and is it social science or survey science? I keep forgetting. DSS group at Facebook. When he approached me in April, I thought if we could host this survey, I thought we would have one survey and we would do this for 3 months and then we would be done, right? So adaptation and UX and scale and whatnot. I mean, we all thought that we would be done with this pandemic a bit earlier, I think, but I had no idea what we were getting into, and none of us had, right? I mean, we didn't see this coming, this problem with Qualtrics. Certain problems like the display of the countries, the ordering of the countries, for example, or the regions within the countries, depending by the language. I think it took 5 months to fix that because Qualtrics had to reprogram their platform to make that possible, right? I mean, it was an enormous effort to get that part right. It led to, you know, at the beginning, before we noticed this problem, it led to a spike of respondents from Afghanistan because that was the first country or among the top there. Things like that. So that was a big issue. And I mean, if you will, you could say like the first couple of weeks maybe were a little bit of in the field testing of the questionnaire. But this translation team is super fast. I mean, usually stuff gets translated within a couple of days and then we would be able to field a fix. So anything that, so what I didn't mention, that we did frequent updates to the questionnaire depending on the development of the pandemic. So for example, we learn about new symptoms and then we added a category among the symptoms question, or, you know, new social distancing behaviors come up, or, you know, the WHO approached us, we really would want to know this financial insecurity and things like that. So we are now in wave 10 of the survey, which of course in the backend always require then to sort of adapt the questionnaire, new translation, fielding it again. And we learned in later waves, fielded sometimes on the global side, you know, a smaller subset first to see if this works. We also experimented a little bit with the consent questions, which ones work better, or, you know, can we shorten the text, things like that. So we took a little part of the sample aside, experimented with it, and then did the full work. You can tell from my explanation, this is a big airplane that we were building as it was flying, you know, so and it has certainly not stopped since, you know, just like the pandemic. So, yeah.
Thanks so much. I figured it was a little more difficult than you were letting on at first. So I was interested in the details. Thank you.
So I see that Sarah has a question, but she can't post it as a panelist. Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. This has been great, Frauke. I have a question because we've been doing a survey around COVID, but in a very different platform and with very different setup. But I'm wondering if you could speak at all, or if you know at all, if the extent to which your responses are bot responses or fraudulent, or, you know, not real people responses, or anything that indicates, if you have any analyses around that issue, that possibility.
Yeah, so not real people is pretty unlikely because the switch from the platform to Qualtrics and navigating the consent statements and what have you, I can't see any robot doing that, right? So it's a little different than surveys that would be on the same platform, where I think that's easier to program and navigate. But I you know, who knows? I mean, I might be wrong on that. We have on the back end, because it, you know, you would look the same. We have one of our partners in at Boston Children's Hospital, Christina. She, in her analyses that she did, also, you know, using these data for the UK and comparing it with the SOE app, they certainly saw people satisfied, or just straight line, you know, questions, or give answers that really can't be right, you know, as in having way too many symptoms of just about everything, or way too many years of schooling and things like that. So like any survey, and certainly anything of that scale, there are always some people who want to torpedo this. But again, because it is a random sample, it's a little harder to tinker with it, right? If it were a survey or something that is driven algorithmically, I think you could very easily, you know, forward and like and promote things and promote people to take it. That's not possible here, because you know, as a robot trying to interfere with it, you have no control over who sees it next. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, both dimensions. That was quite helpful. Thank you.
So I don't see questions in the Q&A right now, so I'm going to move to the end here and switch over to actually a survey we did that has all these problems that you just mentioned. And the context of this was that, we were already in the field with the COVID symptom survey, and then we saw this call from the National Science Foundation on these NSF Rapid Awards. And we thought, okay, let's, collect more data on mental health. That was the initiation of the Johns Hopkins folks. But really what we as the survey team wanted to do is see if how these different methods compared. So we partnered with the Understanding America study out of USC, and which is a web survey that recruits offline, and so pretty high quality web survey, full control also of the respondent pools and what have you, and fielded the same set of questions there, as well as in that global COVID survey that I just mentioned to you, or for this matter, the US version, and in a survey that we ran through the advertisement vehicle on the Facebook platform that I mentioned earlier. We thought, that alone is interesting, right? These three different data sources and how the results compare. That's not what I brought with me. But what we were interested in, if you do field it through the advertisement vehicle, what happens when you recruit sort of, highlighting different topics, recruiting sort of differently, building on leverage salience theory and non-response experiments that have been done by Groves and others over the years. And we wanted to see if, if we do need to do a very rapid opinion survey or capture some behavioral measures, if Facebook as a platform would work, despite this then really being a non-probability survey as its worst, if you will, because you really have no idea who is the population and what's the recruitment mechanism. But to see sort of, can we learn enough about the relationship of these variables among each other, so that you could get a sense, or what would it take, right? How often? I mean, we were just curious to see. So we started this additional survey and had two main questions. One was to see if different images that we would feel would affect the response rate for the surveys. And the second question was if depending on which image people are recruited through, does that change the answer to the web survey? And then how does that compare to the USC survey or the survey done on the global symptom survey Facebook platform? For those of you who are not familiar with the Facebook ad campaign platform, or how to run surveys on Facebook for that matter, step one is you create a Facebook account and have sort of your own page. And then in step two, you select your advertisement goal. What, different categories, as you can see here. Specify an advertisement text, ideally very briefly, because it shows up in the newsfeed. Upload an image, and then you can decide what kind of button should there be below the image, and that usually is used to, applying to something or donating or whatnot. So that's it, very easy, right? And then that's all you need, because with that button, right, then you can move people over to a different platform, just like we did with the other survey. We moved them from that button to a URL on the Maryland Qualtrics installation. And then from there, we did a survey that looked very much like other surveys that we've done, just way shorter. We only fielded, I think, 10 questions on this one here. You have to, in step 7, specify an advertisement category and then a target audience, which of course here can be much more tailored, or is, I mean, in the other one, we don't do that. But what we did specify here was that they should be 18 at a minimum, and that they should be located in the US. Just as a footnote, I'm doing research on privacy, and this step 8 is a little scary because you can drill down quite a bit on different categories. And if you do advertisement, it truly does get tailored there. But for the survey piece, I mean, this vehicle of survey, should say, is often used actually by social scientists or demographers to survey specialty population, like, you know, cis, or, you know, you name it, small population that's very hard to find in any general population frame. This one here could be a starting point. And then you create a budget. You say, when do you want to start and when do you want to end? And then what's the amount of money you want to spend for the survey as a whole? And where the advertisement should be placed, right? Should people see it when they go to Facebook, Messenger, or Instagram? Those services right now have that possibility. WhatsApp not yet, but we'll see. And you know, you have the chance to sort of do the proper UX check here. You can take, you know, see how it looks on a desktop, mobile phone, and various other ways people access Facebook. We only checked for the desktop and the mobile phone, I should say, because I don't think the others would have worked with Qualtrics. What's interesting is when you do a survey of that type, you know, how do you report even response rates, or, you know, our outcome variables are quite hard to measure. Of course, there are link clicks, right? The number of clicks on the link with the ad that we have. There's a metric that Facebook reports, which is the reach, the number of people who saw ads at least once. And reach is different from impressions, which may include multiple views of your ads if you scroll up and down your news feed. And post engagement would be the number of actions taken that people the number of actions people took that saw your ad. In our case, that would be hitting that button and then being moved off the platform, at which point that tracking stops, right? So you see, you know, this is a snapshot here. This was after 14 days. We had spent about roughly $200 on this, and we got 970 links and about 1,500 reach, and the cost per link click was about 20 cents. So pretty cheap. And then, you know, we moved over, as I said, to the Qualtrics survey. You lose a lot of people in that process, without a doubt. And here too, you know, Facebook does not receive any response whether they took the survey or what happened thereafter. There's a hard stop here after that shifting over. On the right, you see our Qualtrics landing page. It explained the usual confidentiality statement. And then, as a little teaser here, the results, or one of the results for our advertisement image. We had one image assigned to 4 different topical areas, and then a neutral one. So the neutral was our control group with this yes, no survey button, and then a COVID focused one, mental health focused one, economic and privacy. And you can see how, you know, the 3 different metrics that we get from Facebook that I just explained, the reach, the engagement, and the link clicks, do vary quite a bit. And, you know, the percentage of people who then, after clicking the consent statement and answered the first survey question, that also varied quite a bit with those that were recruited through the picture that showed these coins, and the privacy picture were sort of the least, you know, that ended up participating in the survey. We have since then continued the study and added other experimental pieces and have a larger N and all of that. So if you will happen to be at April this year, you can see the rest of the results. But let me stop here and collect a second set of questions from you in case you have some to this part. All right, Zach, you have a question. I think you are unmuted, so you can just start talking. I think.
Okay,
I
well,
hope.
can you hear me?
Yes.
So do you think you can build a similar quality, like survey estimate out of the ad space sample to the like random sample that you ran with the COVID survey? Like, would you, if you tweaked the like buttons correctly, right? Do you think that would be like possible?
I'm not sure if I understand yet enough what's going on there, the mechanisms for this, right? I mean, we're still sort of in the midst of analyzing these data to see, what, like, who's breaking off what where, and trying to understand a little bit better the algorithm which the advertisement even appears, right? I mean, if it were you buy advertisement space for the population and then it would guarantee show up at a random sample, then yes, probably, right? But that I don't think that's how the ads work, right? Because the advertisement algorithm is designed to be fielded in a way that it leads to clicks, right? And that sort of distorts or might distort the quality, but we don't know yet. I mean, that's part of why we did it. The different images would were basically, you do need some kind of image, right? So it's somewhat of a separate study. What we did in this most recent iteration is that we fielded a couple of experiments that have been fielded in regular web surveys or other surveys and have consistently shown the same type of results between experimental conditions. And we will be examining whether the population we sample here reacts the same as we see in other surveys, right? So that will give us some insights. And then, of course, that comparison to the Global Symptom Survey and the US survey might shed some light, but a little too early to tell. Would be cool if we can figure this out, but I don't know yet the answer. Yeah.
Do you think the answer will be some sort of like mathematical reweighting, or do you think it'll be something more in the like how you design your
Design it.
interaction with the ads platform itself? Or I mean, maybe it'll take both. I'm just
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. So because you need an image, for example, right? I mean, you could always start with the neutral image, but another strategy just is to have a lot of different images and draw in people lots of different ways, which is something that, with normal like surveys that we mail out, we can't do. I mean, this would probably like exceed any budget that you have, that you tailor that much, right? But here that would be fairly easy to do. So you could, if we see that the images are also not just creating different response rates, but they also draw in different types of people, and that the neutral one is not just the average of the images, but yet again different. Only survey nerds, or who knows. Then I think those might be design strategies that should be implemented. But I do think that there is quite a bit of interesting research going on. Well, I don't think, I know there's quite a bit of interesting research going on in the non-probability survey space, right? Where people are trying to figure out what methods, for example, from machine learning or from Bayesian statistics can be used in order to reweight data that are collected this way, so that they give a better representation of the truth than when you analyze them flat out. And I think, here again, you would then pair this with a design choice, right? You could say, it's like, okay, let me buy into an expensive offline recruited web survey like UAS and field a couple of anchor questions that are similar, and then a larger one this way, and you combine the two data sources and get your more precise estimate than you would otherwise. So the borrowing on these ideas of small area estimation or what have you. So I think that's where I see this going. Yeah.
very cool. Thank you.
So there was a lot of information here. Let me just make sure that while, you know, the last few might type their questions to the Q&A, that if you are interested in using the global survey microdata, you can start with an email to that COVID-19 symptom survey at facebook.com and get information on the data use agreement and all those things. If you have questions to the presentations, I mean, those two studies, I'm happy to answer that. We also have by now a couple of draft papers and that I can share with you, or if you're interested in that waiting document, I can point you to that. Certainly a lot of work in progress, and hopefully there are many of you here who work on the substances side of that, because one thing that I do think these large projects easily overlook is that you need to partner closely with those using the data, right? Because we are so busy still collecting them that, you know, we can't analyze them nearly enough or share out the results with the respective groups. So I hope you can spread the word that these data are available and put them to good use. Still a time of critical decision making, I think.
It doesn't look like there are any more questions. And I know it's late for you, so and you did your student meeting early, so you probably appreciate a couple extra minutes.
Sure. We all, I think, can benefit from a few extra minutes to run from one Zoom meeting to the next, or to bed in my case, exactly.
Well, we all know where to find you, so we really appreciate it. It was extremely insightful. And thanks to Dr. Almquist as well for making the invitation, and for everyone for attending today. So we'll see everyone back next week.
Excellent. Thank you all. And have a
Thanks,
good
Dr.
weekend.
Crowder.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.